For historical context and more information, see the description below.
The Mount of Olives is that range of hills that is east of Jerusalem, and it's separated from the city itself by the Kidron Valley. It was across this Kidron Valley that a great many besieging forces have come through history. It was across the Kidron that David had fled before Absalom. It was across that valley that Jesus had gone with his disciples just previous to the crucifixion, as he went through that period of excruciating agony of the Spirit at Gethsemane. And it was across the Kidron Valley that the Palm Sunday procession made its way. From the portion of the Mount of Olives that is known as the Mount of the Ascension, one can see the entire route. Off to the left is Bethphage, where Jesus sent the two disciples to get the mount on which he was to ride into the city. In one's mind's eye, one can see that procession forming. The main body of disciples could not have been very far from the spot on which we were standing, and it was a thrill to just stand there and watch that route as it led up to the Golden Gate and the entrance to the city of Jerusalem. We're told that this was the spot where the multitude of disciples began to rejoice, right at that spot at the foot of the Mount of Olives. And they began to praise God for all that he had done. The road moves up past the Garden of Gethsemane, down into the valley of Kidron and up the hill on the other side to the entrance of the city. We're told that when Jesus saw the city, he said, "If thou hadst known, even thou at least in this thy day, the things which belong to thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. If thou hadst known, but now." Jesus loved Jerusalem. In another portion he said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how oft would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not." The crowd on Palm Sunday was cheering, was laying the garments in the Palm Sunday in the pathway of the Christ, one that they were so sure was the Messiah and was going to free them from the Roman yoke. But it had very little significance for Jesus Christ. He had wanted to do something about Jerusalem, and he had not been able to get her to respond. If thou hadst known, but now. What does one do when faced by the apparent failure of so much that is close to his heart? For most of it, it's not a dramatic business like going up to a crucifixion. It may be with our own families, it may be with our businesses, it may be 101 things. What does one do when he is faced by the apparent failure of something that's very close to him? Jesus gave us some answers to that question, both directly and indirectly. In the first place, he didn't accept failure as being so complete that there was nothing left. He kept right on doing things. We read where he went first to the temple, and there he cast out the money changers. We read that daily he was in the temple teaching. He went on ministering to the needs of people. He went on preaching. He went on saving the souls of men, even to the time of the cross. Threatened with failure, he kept on working. He kept on doing. You remember that novel, All This and Heaven Too? based on a true story, and it tells of a young French woman who became a governess in one of the leading families of France. There was a breakup between the husband and the wife. The latter was mysteriously murdered, and the governess was accused of a great many things. Finally, her name was cleared, and she came to America, where she was happily married, and she summed up her life in the title of the book, All This and Heaven Too. She had been through all of this, but there was still something out there worth living for, and she must keep working for it. Jesus was right, and history was right. For history has some great things to say about seeming failures. It warns people not to give up too soon. It keeps urging them to continue doing. For instance, many years ago, a 15-year-old lad in a school in Munich was told that he was too lazy ever to amount to anything, and he was asked to leave school. He still wanted to go on with his education in some form or other, and so he took an examination to get into a technical school in Zurich. He was not successful. He could not pass the examination. He kept on trying, and finally he was accepted into a lesser school where he finished his training. And then he applied again to that Zurich school as a teacher. But they were not any more interested in him as a teacher than they were as a student. He kept on searching. Finally, he got a position tutoring a group of boys in a boarding house. But he was fired before many weeks had passed. He finally got a position in the patent office in Bern. Do you remember his name? Albert Einstein. Failure couldn't overcome him because he dared to stand up to failure, and he dared to keep on doing. Time after time he looked at his Jerusalem, and it would not. But he kept on. We're proud of an American name like Dwight W. Morrow, senior class in Amherst, voted on the question as to who was most likely to succeed, and all but one in the class voted for Morrow. Morrow voted for Calvin Coolidge. And he proved to be a great lawyer. He proved to be a great teacher. He was a great diplomat, a great citizen and public servant. The night before his death, he was giving a speech to the Federation for the Support of Jewish Philanthropic Societies. And he finished his address with the words, "You do not dare to fail." Well, it might have been a motto of his life. It might have been a motto of these United States of America, but they're not true. Thousands of people have dared to fail, but they have not been willing to accept failure on its face value. It was the failure of Keats as a drug clerk that gave to his Keats the poet. It was the failure of Phillips Brooks as the teacher that gave to his Phillips Brooks the preacher. It was failure of Boswell the lawyer that gave to his Boswell the biographer. Sometimes, although we say that nothing succeeds like success, history seems to say to us very frequently that nothing succeeds like failure. And some of the most important figures of the last week thought that they'd succeeded. Judas had succeeded. He got what he was after. Caiaphas had succeeded. He was still in control of the ecclesiastical machinery of his time. Pilate had succeeded. He had made the popular decision. The public wanted the Christ to be crucified. Herod had succeeded. He wanted to be rid of both John and Jesus, and now both of them were gone, and he could go on with whatever conduct he liked. And so it was that you follow through that group. Jesus seemed to be the only one who had failed. And broken-hearted, he looked on Jerusalem and he said, "If thou hadst known, but now." And yet it was he who succeeded in his failure, and it was they who failed in their success. They had tried to save their lives, and they had lost their lives. And they wouldn't even be remembered if it hadn't been for the association of their names with the story of Jesus Christ. But he teaches something else where failure threatens. He teaches the importance of faith and the importance of the Spirit in these things we've been talking about. You recall that great verse in the 11th chapter of Hebrews? We've been given the names of so many that had gone before, and then it says in the 13th verse, "These all died in the faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off." They didn't get what they were after. Because of that, some might say that they had failed. But they did see what they wanted afar off. And they kept the faith. Their faith, their spirits did not falter in the face of failure. And this is what Jesus is saying to us as he looked on Jerusalem. He still saw the promises afar off, even beyond Calvary. Douglas's novel, The Robe, Marcellus says to Justice, "If you think Jesus is alive, where is he?" Justice shook his head. He made a hopeless little gesture with both hands and drew a long sigh. "I don't know," he said drearily, "but I do know he is alive." After a quiet moment, Justice brightened a little. "I'm always looking for him," he went on. "Every time a door opens, at every turn of the road, at every street corner, at every hill crest. He had a spirit, you see, that looked beyond the evidence of what was to the evidence of what he knew must be. And he realized that if everything were clear to us, we wouldn't need the exercise of this word faith. For faith comes into play so frequently when we see the sign, the dead-end street, but we're sure there's a way through. We refuse to give in. So often, you see, seeming failure has to give in to a spirit that will not give in. For in the long pull, failure is a failure of spirit rather than of circumstance. And if one who's compelled to toil in obscurity retains his dignity of spirit, if he remains cheerful and if he remains gracious, if he uses such opportunities as he has to build what the poet has called a city of the mind, does not allow jealousy or bitterness or envy to turn him from the happiness he may enjoy in humble circumstance, if he has done these things, no failure can overcome him. For failure is a thing of the Spirit. Jesus, you see, is saying to us by his example that he knew that within himself there was that which had not failed. Dear old Jeremy Taylor was robbed of everything. It seemed to be his honor, his position, his estates. But he quietly made the remark, "They have left me the sun and the moon. They have not taken away my merry countenance and my cheerful spirit and a good conscience." Sometimes it takes a few real good failures to bring us to the place where we recognize the importance of intangibles like that. For you see, when we're threatened by the whole house threatening to tumble down, we only have one of two alternatives. Either we are going to go into a state of despair, or we're going to exercise a faith. Either blank, unrelieved pessimism, or a gambler's throw with his soul, if you will. Either darkness and futility and ultimate night, or a vision of hope. One of those two things, and there's no third way. And I believe firmly that when we come to the end of the road, God is not going to judge us by the circumstance of failure. He's not going to judge us so much by what we have accomplished in this, our Father's world, as he is going to judge us by the spirit that we took to our Jerusalem. For I repeat, failure is a thing of the Spirit. You may recall that before Harlan Fiske-Stone was Supreme Court Justice, he was made the Attorney General to clean house after the scandal of the Harding administration. It was Stone who picked J. Edgar Hoover to be the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He always was a good friend of Hoover's, and we're told that many days he would drop into his office and he would say, "Edgar, I came to inquire into your stewardship." Well, I believe that the spirit of man constitutes his greatest stewardship. How we react, what we bring to the circumstances of life, whether we become snowed under circumstances, or whether we have a faith that keeps on living and is strong and potent within us, these are the important things. What did you make of life? Don't you believe when you come to the end of the way, this is going to be the important question? Not so much did you make this in the way of money, or did you reach such and such a place in the way of position, but were you be able to come through all the puzzlements of life, and yet you yourself able to hold on to a steadfast faith and believe that beyond what was appearing to the eye was something deeper that could not fail. When we were in Buffalo some years ago in our ministry, there was one man that I could never quote in church, in sermons, because this man was always in church. If you want to be sure that nothing is going to be said about you in public, make sure you're in church on Sunday morning. But he had a story to tell. 10 years before that, he had been the owner of a small foundry The depression was on, his business failed, and he insisted on paying every one of his creditors, and had left him without a penny. He was 65 years of age. He had married late. He had 3 children under 15 years of age. The only job he was able to get was cleaning floors in a chocolate factory. One day, when he had made some reference to his reverses, he said, "I have discovered that no man has really failed so long as he keeps his self-respect and doesn't let the light go out inside." That's keeping the faith. Materially ruined, but the spirit still intact, Jesus proved that even at the cross is not the end of things when one refuses to let the light go out inside. What keeps it burning? Above all else, the realization that there is in this world that which is indestructible and that which cannot fail, and one can link up with that. Did you read the novel, The Seventh Cross? It's a morbid story, at least a portion of it. Related some of the sufferings of the prisoners that were thrown into the concentration camps under Hitler. One of those prisoners expressed his thinking in this way. He said, "A whole generation had to be annihilated." These were our thoughts on that terrible morning, which, for the first time, we voiced our conviction that if we were to be destroyed on that scale, all would perish because there would be none to come after us. The best that grew in the land was being torn out by the roots because the children had been taught to regard it as weeds. But the final words are these: all of us felt how ruthlessly and fearfully outward powers could strike to the very core of man. But at the same time, we felt that at the very core there was something that was unassailable. That's it, you see. When threatened with failure, Jesus knew that there's something in this world that's unassailable. Of course, on the cross, he was repeating a part of the 22nd Psalm. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? But that first verse of the 22nd Psalm is not the last word in the psalm. We may be sure that Jesus was quoting it. And when you get down to the 24th verse, it says this: "For he hath not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, neither hath he hid his face from him, but when he cried unto him, he heard." That's also the 22nd Psalm. And it was to this God that he commended himself and commended his spirit when he was threatened with failure. He was looking to that which was unassailable. There is a truth that will not be stopped. It may be crushed to earth for a time, but if it is truth, it will rise again. And Jesus knew when he entered Jerusalem that even though there were those things that looked like failure, All was far from lost because he was linked to the truth and to the eternal and to the unassailable and to the indestructible and to that which could not fail. So outside the city upon which he looked and wept, they nailed him to a cross. But success refused to stay with those who thought they had it. It refused to stay with them because they didn't bargain on God. There can be no success without him, no failure with it. And on Palm Sunday in the last week, Jesus was proof again that whate'er betide, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up. That's a great thing to know. If our faith is not to falter when our Jerusalem comes into view. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We have presented a recording of this morning's worship service from the Shadyside Presbyterian Church, Amberson Avenue and Westminster Place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ministers of the church are Dr. Howard C. Scharfe, Dr. James H. Blackwood, and the Reverend Richard M. Cromie. Organist and choir director, Russell G. Wickman. Today's sermon by Dr. Scharfe was titled, When Failure Threatens.